They say the house always wins. For 15 years, I believed that meant Blake's casino empire was unstoppable. I thought I was part of that house, safe within its glittering walls, protected by the fortune my husband had built from nothing. I was wrong about everything except one thing: Faye, the house does always win. I just didn't know which house that would be. Me name is Amara, and this is the story of how I learned that sometimes the most devastating losses lead to the most unexpected victories. It is about discovering that the people who love you leave you weapons you never knew existed, and that justice doesn't always come with gavels and courtrooms. Sometimes it comes with security cameras and handcuffs. In front of everyone who thought you were weak. The Belmont Casino wasn't just Blake's business, Faye, it was our kingdom. Every night, I would walk through the gaming floor in my designer dresses, watching the chandeliers cast rainbow prisms across the marble floors, listening to the symphonic chaos of slot machines and roulette wheels. Blake would find me there, wrap his arms around my waist, and whisper, "Look what we built, baby, look what we have." The penthouse apartment above the casino was our sanctuary. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, and every morning I would wake up to Blake bringing me coffee in bed, kissing my forehead, telling me how lucky he was to have found me. For 15 years, this was our routine. For 15 years, I felt like the luckiest woman alive. Blake wasn't born into money. He started as a pit boss at someone else's casino, working double shifts, studying every angle of the business. When we met, I was finishing my master's degree in business administration, working part-time as a cocktail waitress to pay for school. He was intense, ambitious, and completely devoted to building something extraordinary. When he proposed after 2 years of dating, he said, "I want to build an empire with you, Amara. Not for you, Faye, with you." And for a long time, it felt like we had. I handled the books, managed vendor relationships, designed the VIP experiences that made high rollers feel like royalty. Blake handled operations, security, and the endless networking required to keep politicians and licensing boards happy. We were partners in every sense of the word. Our life was beautiful and seemingly perfect. We traveled to Monaco for casino conferences, spent summers in our lake house, threw charity galas that raised hundreds of thousands for local schools. Blake would introduce me to business associates as my secret weapon and the brains behind the beauty. I felt valued, cherished, essential, but looking back now, I realize that even the most perfect illusions have cracks if you know where to look. Blake had started working later, staying in his office long after the casino floor quieted down. When I would bring him dinner, I would sometimes catch him quickly closing laptop screens or ending phone calls abruptly. "Just boring administrative stuff," he would say, pulling me onto his lap. "Nothing you need to worry your beautiful head about." The changes were so gradual that I didn't notice them until they became impossible to ignore. Blake became more controlling about our finances, insisting that I use only one credit card while he handled everything else. He said it was simpler for taxes and better for our credit score. When I suggested we review our investment portfolio together like we used to, he became irritated. "Amara, you've got enough to handle with the day-to-day operations. Let me worry about the big financial picture. Trust me, Faye, I've never let us down before." The conversations about money became increasingly tense. Blake would criticize purchases I'd been making for years: Faye, fresh flowers for the penthouse. My monthly spa appointments, dinners with friends. "You are spending like we're printing money," he would say. "We need to be more careful." I started to feel like I was walking on eggshells in my own home. When I tried to access our joint investment account online, I discovered that the password had been changed. When I asked Blake about it, he said the bank had required updates for security reasons, and he'd handle it. Every time I pushed for transparency, he became defensive, turning the conversation back to my spending, or questioning why I didn't trust him. The final weeks before everything collapsed, Blake was like a stranger. He would disappear for entire afternoons without explanation, claiming he was meeting with potential investors for an expansion project he'd never mentioned before. His phone was constantly buzzing with messages he wouldn't answer in front of me. Our bedroom became a war zone of whispered arguments about money, trust, and the future. I knew something was terribly wrong, but I couldn't have imagined how wrong. I thought maybe he was having an affair, Faye, painful enough, but survivable. I thought maybe the business was struggling difficult, but we could rebuild. I never imagined that the man who promised to build an empire with me had actually been systematically destroying me to save himself. The final blow came on a Tuesday morning that started like any other. Blake brought me coffee, kissed my forehead, and told me he had some challenging news to discuss when he got home from work. I spent the entire day anxious, running through every possible scenario in my mind. None of them came close to the truth. When Blake came home that evening, he didn't look like the confident casino owner who had left that morning. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his tie was loose, and his face was grave in a way I'd never seen before. He sat me down on our Italian leather sofa, took my hands in his, and spoke words that shattered my world. Amara, we've lost everything. The words hit me like a physical blow. What do you mean everything? The casino, the penthouse, the lake house, our investments, all of it. We're facing bankruptcy. I couldn't breathe. How is that possible? The casino's been profitable for years. Our accountant just told us. The accountant doesn't know everything. Blake interrupted, his voice sharp with panic. There are debts you don't know about. Gambling debts. Gambling debts. I stared at him in disbelief. Blake, you own a casino. Why would you have gambling debts? His explanation came out in a rush, a carefully constructed story that I would later realize was almost entirely fabricated. He told me about high-stakes private games, about trying to network with influential players who turned out to be connected to dangerous people. He claimed he'd been trying to secure investment opportunities and got in over his head. I thought I could win it back, he said, his eyes filled with what looked like genuine anguish. I thought I could fix it before you ever had to know, but they're calling in the debts now, and they want everything. The amount he mentioned was staggering, over $3 million, enough to destroy everything we'd built together. But our emergency funds, our investments, our retirement accounts, I began. Gone. I had to use everything to try to stay afloat. Amara, I am so sorry, I've destroyed us. The next several hours were a blur of phone calls, frantic searches through financial documents, and Blake explaining why various assets were no longer available. Every account I tried to access was either empty or frozen. Every investment we'd built over 15 years had vanished. But the cruelest blow came when Blake looked at me with eyes that had once held so much love and said, Amara, there is something else. The creditors, they're claiming that some of these debts are in your name. My name? That is impossible. I never signed anything. You did, baby. Remember all those documents I had you sign over the years for the business? Some of them were personal guarantees. I never thought it would matter because I never thought I'd lose. The room started spinning. Years of signing papers Blake handed me, trusting him completely when he said they were routine business documents, insurance forms, tax papers. I never read them carefully, because I trusted him with my life. Now that trust was being used to destroy me. What does that mean? What are you saying? Blake's voice was barely a whisper. It means they can come after you for the money. It means you are legally responsible for debts you didn't know existed. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay next to the man who had been my partner, my lover, my best friend for 15 years, and I felt like I was sleeping next to a stranger. Everything I thought I knew about our life, our finances, our future, had been a lie. The next morning, I tried calling our lawyer, our accountant, our financial advisor. Blake intercepted every call, claiming he'd already spoken to everyone, and there was nothing they could do. When I insisted on speaking to them directly, he became agitated. Amara, you are just going to humiliate us both. Everyone already knows we're finished. Do you want to parade around town begging for help? Do you want everyone to know how badly I've failed you? His shame felt genuine. His pain seemed real, and his desperation was convincing. For a few days I believed we were in this disaster together. I started making plans for how we could rebuild, where we could live, how we could start over. I was ready to stand by him and fight our way back to stability. That illusion lasted exactly 1 week. I discovered the truth by accident, in the most devastating way possible. I had gone to the casino to collect some personal items from my office, thinking it was one of the last times I'd be able to enter the building before the creditors seized everything. As I was packing up 15 years of memories, I heard familiar laughter from Blake's office across the hall. The door was slightly ajar, and through the gap I could see Blake sitting at his desk, completely relaxed, talking on the phone. But he wasn't alone. Sitting across from him, in the chair where I used to sit during our morning meetings, was Cassandra, one of our VIP hostesses. Cassandra was 24, blonde, ambitious, and everything I used to be when Blake and I first met. I'd hired her myself 6 months earlier, impressed by her intelligence and work ethic. She was beautiful in that fresh, untouched way that made older women feel ancient by comparison. But what I saw wasn't just Blake talking to an employee. Cassandra was sitting with her legs crossed, wearing one of my designer blazers from the office closet, and Blake was looking at her the way he used to look at me. Their body language was intimate, comfortable, and painfully familiar. I couldn't hear the full conversation, but I caught enough phrases to understand that whatever financial crisis Blake had described to me wasn't affecting him the way he'd claimed. He was talking about new opportunities, fresh starts, and being free to move forward. Then I heard the words that confirmed my worst fears. Once the divorce is finalized, and the debts are transferred to her name, we'll be completely free to start over somewhere fresh. Divorce debts transferred to my name, starting over with someone else. I stood in that hallway for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, watching my husband plan his future with another woman while destroying mine. The man who had held me while I cried about our shared financial ruin was actively orchestrating my complete destruction. Everything clicked into place. Why I couldn't access our accounts, why all the debts seemed to be mysteriously tied to my name, why Blake was so adamant that I not speak to our professional advisors directly. This wasn't a gambling addiction or a business failure. This was a deliberate, calculated plan to transfer his debts to me and start fresh with a younger woman. I backed away from the door quietly, finished packing my things with hands that shook with rage and betrayal, and left the building without confronting them. I needed time to think, to plan, to figure out how to respond to this level of betrayal. That night, Blake came home and continued the charade. He held me while I cried about our shared losses, comforted me when I worried about our future, and promised that we would face whatever came next together. He was an excellent actor. If I hadn't seen the truth with my own eyes, I would have believed every word. The first thing I did was call my father. Dad, Robert Sterling, was 72 years old and had spent 40 years as head of security for various casinos before retiring 5 years earlier. He knew every aspect of casino operations, from the obvious to the hidden, from the legal to the questionable. More importantly, he understood the kind of men who thrived in that world, and he'd always been quietly skeptical of Blake. Dad, I need your help, and I need you to not ask too many questions until I can explain everything. His voice was immediately alert. What is wrong, sweetheart? I told him about Blake's claims of financial ruin, about the debts supposedly in my name, about the impending loss of everything we'd built together. I didn't mention what I'd seen in Blake's office. Not. I wanted my father's professional opinion before I revealed the full scope of Blake's betrayal. Dad listened without interrupting, but I could hear him typing in the background. After 40 years in casino security, he had contacts everywhere and access to information systems that most people didn't know existed. Amara, he said slowly, nothing about this story makes sense. Blake's casino has been profitable for years. I've seen the quarterly reports through industry contacts, and the kind of gambling debts he is describing, they don't work the way he is claiming. What do you mean? Legitimate private games don't create the kind of legal obligations he is describing, and if he was involved with loan sharks or illegal operations, they wouldn't be going through courts or legal channels to collect. They'd handle it very differently. My father's voice became very serious. Sweetheart, I think someone is lying to you, and I think I know who. Over the next 2 hours, my father used his decades of industry connections to uncover the truth about our financial situation. What he discovered was both worse and better than I had imagined. The bad news: Blake had indeed accumulated enormous debts, but not through gambling. He had been systematically borrowing against our assets for over 2 years, using forged documents with my signature to secure loans and lines of credit. The casino was heavily mortgaged, our personal assets were leveraged beyond their value, and several investment accounts had been emptied. The worst news: Blake had been transferring money to offshore accounts and had already moved significant assets beyond my reach. The timing suggested this had been planned for a very long time. The devastating news: Blake had filed preliminary divorce papers 3 weeks earlier, citing irreconcilable differences due to financial disagreements caused by the defendant's excessive spending. The papers included a detailed accounting of debts that were claimed to be my sole responsibility, but then came the surprising news: Amara, your signature on about 60% of these documents is forged. I can tell because I taught you to sign your name a very specific way when you were a child, with a particular flourish that is almost impossible to replicate. Someone practiced your signature, but they couldn't get that detail right. And finally, the news that would change everything. Sweetheart, I think Blake has underestimated something important. When I set up that casino security system 12 years ago, I included some features that Blake doesn't know about. Features that record a lot more than just the gaming floor. My father had installed a comprehensive surveillance system that captured not just the public areas of the casino, but also executive offices, meeting rooms, and even some private areas. The system was designed to protect against employee theft, but it had been recording everything that happened in Blake's office for over a decade. Dad, are you saying? I am saying that if Blake has been meeting with people to plan financial fraud, if he has been conducting business that hurts you, if he has been doing anything in that office that he shouldn't have been doing, we have a record of it. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than despair. I felt the stirring of something that might have been hope, but felt more like righteous anger. What do I need to do? First, you need to protect yourself legally. I am going to give you the name of a lawyer who specializes in financial fraud, not a divorce attorney, a criminal attorney. Second, you need to start documenting everything Blake tells you. Record conversations if you can do it legally. Third, you need to stay calm and not let Blake know that you suspect anything. Dad. Yes, sweetheart. There is something else I need to tell you. Something I saw today. I told him about Blake and Cassandra, about the conversation I'd overheard, about the realization that this wasn't financial failure but deliberate destruction. The silence on the other end of the phone lasted so long that I thought we'd been disconnected. When my father finally spoke, his voice was cold in a way I'd never heard before. That son of a bitch. My father had always been protective, but I'd never heard him sound dangerous. Dad. Amara, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Blake isn't just stealing from you. He is destroying your life to build a new one with someone else. That is not just fraud, it is evil. And it ends now. What do you mean? I mean that Blake chose the wrong woman to mess with, and he made one critical mistake. What mistake? My father's voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of 40 years of experience dealing with men who thought they could cheat the system. He forgot that in this business, the house always wins. He just forgot which house he was dealing with. That night, I lay next to Blake and listened to him breathe, while he slept peacefully, unaware that his carefully constructed plan was about to collapse around him. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I had some power. Not much, but enough to fight back. The man who had spent 15 years telling me he loved me, who had built a life with me and then decided to destroy me for someone younger, had no idea that he was about to learn a lesson that every casino owner should know by heart: never bet against the house when you don't know who really owns it. The criminal attorney my father recommended was named Sarah Chen, and she was nothing like what I expected. Instead of the aggressive, flashy lawyer I'd imagined, she was quietly competent, methodical, and absolutely ruthless in the way she analyzed Blake's actions. Mrs. Patterson, she said during our first meeting, your husband has committed multiple felonies: forgery, fraud, identity theft, embezzlement. Any one of these charges could result in significant prison time, combined. We're looking at potential sentences that would put him away for decades. She spread out copies of the forged documents across her conference table. But more importantly for your immediate situation, every contract or debt obligation signed with your forged signature is legally void. You are not responsible for any of this. But what about the assets he has already moved, the money he has transferred? That is where things get interesting, because he used forged signatures to access some of these accounts, Those transfers constitute theft. We can trace the money and force its return. But she leaned back in her chair and studied me carefully. Mrs. Patterson, I need to ask you something directly. Do you want to simply protect yourself financially? Or do you want Blake to face consequences for what he has done to you? What do you mean? I mean that we can handle this quietly through civil litigation, recover your assets and protect your credit. Blake would face financial consequences, but probably avoid criminal charges if he cooperates and returns what he has stolen. She paused. Or we can pursue criminal charges and make sure that everyone knows exactly what kind of man Blake Patterson really is. The choice is yours, but you need to decide before we proceed. I thought about Blake sleeping peacefully next to me for the past month while I cried myself to sleep. I thought about him comforting me about our shared financial crisis while planning his future with another woman. I thought about Cassandra wearing my blazer in what used to be my office. I want everyone to know exactly what kind of man he really is. Sarah Chen smiled for the first time since I'd met her. Then we're going to need to be very strategic about how we handle this. Your father mentioned that surveillance footage might be available. Over the next week, my father and Sarah worked together to build a comprehensive case against Blake. The surveillance system my father had installed was more sophisticated than Blake had realized. It captured not just video, but audio from every conversation that had taken place in Blake's office for the past 5 years. What they found was a masterclass in long-term manipulation and fraud. The recordings showed Blake meeting with Cassandra for over 8 months, not just as an employer and employee, but as conspirators planning my destruction. They captured him practicing my signature, discussing which documents he could forge without getting caught, and strategizing about how to transfer maximum financial responsibility to me while protecting his own assets. Most damaging of all, the recordings captured Blake and Cassandra laughing about my emotional distress, mocking my tears about our shared financial problems, and celebrating their success at manipulating me. In one particularly painful recording, Blake told Cassandra, "She is so trusting, it is almost too easy. I tell her we're broke. She believes me. I tell her she is responsible for debts she never signed for. She believes that too. By the time she figures out what really happened, we'll be in Monaco and she'll be stuck dealing with lawyers for years." Cassandra's response was even worse. "Do you think she'll kill herself? I mean, when she realizes she has lost everything and everyone knows what a fool she is." Blake's laughter on the recording was casual, unconcerned. "I don't really care what she does. She served her purpose." When Sarah played that recording for me, I felt something inside me change permanently. The man I'd loved for 15 years. The man I'd trusted with my heart, my body, my finances, my future, didn't just want to leave me. He wanted to destroy me so completely that he was indifferent to whether I survived the process. "Sarah," I said quietly, "I want to make sure Blake gets everything he deserves." "What did you have in mind?" "He is planning to destroy me publicly, to humiliate me, to make everyone think I am a fool who ruined our lives through my own stupidity. I want the truth to come out in a way that he can never escape." Sarah leaned forward. "Tell me what you are thinking." "Blake's hosting his annual high-stakes poker tournament next weekend. It is the biggest social event of the year in our industry. Casino owners, politicians, celebrities, business leaders, everyone who matters will be there. Blake sees it as his farewell party before disappearing with Cassandra. And I want him arrested there, in front of everyone, when he thinks he has won." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "That is theatrical. Blake destroyed my life as a performance for his new girlfriend. I think his downfall should be equally public." "Mrs. Patterson, are you sure you want to do this? Once we take this step, there is no going back. Blake will face serious criminal charges, and the publicity will be intense." I thought about the question seriously. A quiet resolution would be simpler, cleaner, more dignified. I could recover my assets, get divorced, and rebuild my life without public drama. But Blake hadn't chosen dignity. He'd chosen cruelty, humiliation, and deliberate destruction. He'd planned to leave me bankrupt and broken, while everyone in our industry whispered about what a fool I'd been. "Sarah, if we do this quietly, Blake will just move to another city and find another woman to destroy. He'll tell people that our marriage failed because of my spending or my emotional instability, or whatever story serves him best. He'll never face real consequences. I stood up and walked to the window of Sarah's office, looking down at the city where Blake and I had built our life together. But if everyone sees him arrested for fraud and identity theft at his own party, if everyone learns that he forged my signature and stole our assets to pay for his girlfriend's lifestyle, then he can't rewrite the story. Everyone will know exactly who he is. When I turned around, Sarah was smiling again. In that case, Mrs. Patterson, let's make sure Blake's farewell party is one that everyone remembers. The week leading up to Blake's poker tournament was the most difficult acting job of my life. I had to continue playing the role of the devastated wife, who was preparing to lose everything, while secretly working with Sarah and my father to coordinate Blake's very public downfall. Blake's behavior during that week was a masterclass in manipulation. He was attentive, affectionate, and seemingly devastated by our impending losses. He brought me flowers, cooked my favorite meals, and held me while I cried about our uncertain future. If I hadn't known the truth, I would have fallen for his performance completely. Amara baby, I know this tournament feels wrong given our situation, but I can't cancel it now. Too many important people are expecting it. But I promise, after this weekend, we'll face whatever comes next together. He was such a convincing liar that part of me still struggled to believe the evidence Sarah had shown me. The man holding me and promising to face our problems together seemed genuinely caring, genuinely remorseful about our situation, but then he would disappear for hours to handle last-minute arrangements, and I would remember the recordings of him laughing about my pain with Cassandra. The night before the tournament, Blake sat me down for what he claimed would be our last serious conversation about our finances. Amara, tomorrow is going to be difficult. There are going to be lawyers here, people asking questions about our situation. I need you to let me handle all of that. Don't talk to anyone about our finances, don't sign anything, don't make any statements. Can you do that for me? Of course, Blake. I trust you. Good. And baby, after tomorrow, things are going to change quickly. The bankruptcy proceedings will move fast, and we might not have much time to adjust to our new reality. He was preparing me for his disappearance. In his mind, I would wake up Monday morning to find him gone, my bank accounts empty, and my credit destroyed. He thought I would spend years fighting legal battles while he started his new life with Cassandra. The day of the tournament, Blake was in his element. He spent the morning directing staff, greeting early arrivals, and ensuring that everything was perfect. The main casino floor had been transformed into an elegant party venue, with high-stakes poker tables surrounded by cocktail areas where guests could socialize between hands. By 6 o'clock, the casino was filled with the most powerful people in our industry. Blake moved through the crowd like a king holding court, accepting congratulations on another successful event, while privately preparing to abandon everything he'd built. I played my role perfectly, staying close to Blake, smiling at the right moments, and accepting sympathetic looks from people who had heard rumors about our financial troubles. Several women pulled me aside to offer support, and their genuine kindness made it even more difficult to maintain my composure. At 8 o'clock, Blake stood up to make his traditional opening remarks. The crowd gathered around the main poker table, glasses of champagne in hand, expecting his usual charming speech about competition, friendship, and the excitement of the game ahead. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us for what has become the highlight of our social calendar. For 15 years, Amara and I have been honored to host this event, and tonight. He paused, looking directly at me with what appeared to be genuine emotion. Tonight feels particularly special because it represents not just the culmination of this year's tournament, but a celebration of the community we've built together. The crowd applauded, and Blake raised his glass toward me. To my beautiful wife Amara, who has been the heart and soul of everything we've accomplished here. If I hadn't known what was coming, if I hadn't heard the recordings of him planning my destruction, that moment might have broken my heart. He was so convincing, so apparently sincere, that several people in the crowd wiped away tears, but I knew the truth. I knew that Blake was delivering what he thought was my eulogy, a final public statement about our marriage, before he destroyed me and disappeared. The poker games began at 8:30, and Blake settled in at the main table with 7 other high-stakes players. I mingled with the other guests, accepting condolences about our rumored financial troubles, and maintaining my facade of brave dignity in the face of impending disaster. At 9:15, exactly on schedule, Sarah Chen entered the casino. She wasn't alone. Behind her were 6 federal agents, 3 state investigators, and Detective Martinez from the Financial Crimes Division. The group was dressed formally, blending in with the other guests, but their presence immediately changed the energy in the room. Sarah approached me near the bar, far enough from the poker table that our conversation wouldn't be overheard. "Mrs. Patterson, are you ready for this?" "I am ready. Once we start, everything happens very quickly. Are you certain you want to proceed?" I looked across the room at Blake, who was laughing with his poker companions, while betting with money he'd stolen from our joint accounts. At the table next to him, Cassandra was serving drinks to the players, wearing a dress I recognized as one Blake had bought for our anniversary last year. "I am certain." Sarah nodded and spoke quietly into her phone. "We're proceeding." The arrest began so smoothly that most guests didn't realize what was happening. Detective Martinez approached Blake's table during a break between hands, when players were ordering drinks and chatting casually. "Mr. Patterson, I am Detective Martinez with the Financial Crimes Division. I have a warrant for your arrest." The poker table fell silent. Blake looked up from his cards with confusion rather than fear. He genuinely had no idea what was happening. "I am sorry, Detective. There must be some mistake. What is this regarding?" "You are under arrest for multiple counts of fraud, forgery, identity theft, and embezzlement. You have the right to remain silent." The detective's voice carried across the suddenly quiet casino floor. Other conversations stopped as guests realized that something extraordinary was happening. Blake's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, anger, and finally, panic. "This is ridiculous. I am hosting a private event." "You can't just, sir. You need to place your hands behind your back." Wait, there has been a mistake, officer. I am a respected businessman. I can clear this up with a phone call." But as the handcuffs clicked into place, Blake's eyes found mine across the room. For the first time, he saw my face clearly. Not devastated, not broken, but calm and resolute. Understanding hit him like a physical blow. His mouth opened in shock as he realized that his perfect plan had been discovered, that his victim had turned into his prosecutor. "Amara." His voice was barely a whisper, but it carried across the silent room. "Amara, what have you done?" I walked slowly toward the poker table, aware that every person in the casino was watching, aware that this moment would be remembered and discussed for years to come. When I reached Blake's side, I looked him directly in the eyes. The same eyes that had looked at me with love for 15 years, the same eyes that had lied to me for months, while planning my destruction. "Blake," I said quietly, but loud enough for everyone to hear, "you know what they say." I paused, letting the silence stretch, letting everyone in the room focus on my next words. "The house always wins. You just forgot which house you were playing against." The room remained frozen as federal agents escorted Blake toward the exit. But just before they reached the door, Blake turned back toward me one last time. "Amara, please. We can fix this. We can work this out." I looked at the man who had shared my bed, my life, my dreams for 15 years. The man who had held me while I cried about problems he had created. The man who had planned to destroy me completely and disappear without a backward glance. "Blake," I said, and my voice was steady and clear, "you already worked it out. This is just the result." As the doors closed behind him, the casino erupted in whispered conversations. Guests pulled out phones to call lawyers, journalists, and friends who needed to hear about what had just happened. The poker tournament was forgotten as everyone tried to understand how Blake Patterson, one of the most successful casino owners in the region, had been arrested for defrauding his own wife. But I wasn't finished. Cassandra had tried to slip away when the arrest began, but Detective Martinez had been waiting for her near the back exit. "Miss Williams, we also have a warrant for your arrest as an accessory to fraud and conspiracy." Cassandra's arrest was quieter than Blake's, but no less satisfying. As she was led away in handcuffs, several guests who had always admired her ambition and beauty realized exactly how she had been planning to advance her career. By 10 o'clock, the casino was empty except for law enforcement. a few close friends, who had stayed to support me, and Sarah Chen, who was coordinating with the investigators to ensure that all evidence was properly documented. I stood in the middle of the empty casino floor, surrounded by abandoned poker chips and half-finished drinks, and felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. The aftermath of Blake's arrest was swift and decisive. Within 72 hours, Sarah's team had frozen all of Blake's assets and begun the process of recovering the money he had stolen. The forged documents that had seemed so threatening when Blake presented them to me were easily dismissed by the court once experts confirmed that my signatures were fake. Blake's carefully planned escape to Monaco became a federal case when investigators discovered that he had been moving money to offshore accounts for over a year. What he had intended as his retirement fund became evidence of premeditation in his fraud case. The casino which Blake had mortgaged heavily to fund his scheme was in better financial shape than anyone had realized. Once the forged documents were voided and the stolen funds recovered, the business was not only solvent but profitable. The board of directors, who had been prepared to liquidate everything, instead voted unanimously to transfer Blake's ownership share to me. Cassandra's involvement elevated the case from simple fraud to organized conspiracy. The recordings from my father's surveillance system captured months of detailed planning, including discussions about which assets to target, how to forge my signature most convincingly, and what they would do with the stolen money. During his arraignment, Blake's lawyer tried to argue that his client was a troubled man who had made poor financial decisions under pressure. But when the prosecution played excerpts from the surveillance recordings, the courtroom heard Blake and Cassandra laughing about my emotional distress and joking about whether I might kill myself when I realized the extent of my losses. The judge's expression during those recordings was something I will never forget. When Blake's laughter filled the courtroom as he discussed my potential suicide, even his own lawyer looked disgusted. Blake was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. Cassandra received 6 years. Both were ordered to pay full restitution, though Blake's assets had already been seized and returned to me. But the most satisfying aspect of their downfall wasn't the prison sentences or the financial recovery. It was watching Blake's reputation crumble as the details of his scheme became public. The story of the casino owner who tried to destroy his wife to fund his affair became headline news across the gaming industry. Blake went from being a respected businessman to a cautionary tale about greed and betrayal. Every article about the case included details about the surveillance recordings, ensuring that everyone knew exactly how cruel and calculating his plan had been. Cassandra's modeling career, which she had hoped to fund with stolen money, ended before it began. No legitimate agency would represent someone convicted of conspiracy to commit fraud, and her name became synonymous with gold digging and criminal ambition. 6 months after Blake's arrest, I received a letter from him in prison. He had written to apologize, to beg for forgiveness, to ask if I would consider waiting for him to be released, so we could try to rebuild our relationship. I read the letter once, then handed it to Sarah, who added it to our file documenting Blake's continued attempts to manipulate me even from prison. I never responded to his letter. I never visited him. I never took his phone calls. The man who had decided I was disposable, when he found someone younger and more exciting, had lost the right to my attention permanently. A year later, I was contacted by a producer from a true crime television show, who wanted to feature our story. The show would have given me a platform to tell my side of events, to ensure that Blake's crimes were remembered, to warn other women about the signs of financial abuse. I declined the interview, not because I was ashamed of what had happened, or because I wanted to protect Blake's reputation, but because I realized that I didn't need the validation of having my story told. Blake's criminal conviction was validation enough. His 12-year prison sentence was justice enough. The complete destruction of his reputation, and the recovery of my financial security were victory enough. I had learned something important during the months of Blake's deception, and the weeks of planning his downfall. The most powerful form of revenge isn't public humiliation or dramatic confrontations. It is simply living well while your enemies face the consequences of their actions. Today, I run the casino that Blake tried to steal from me. I've expanded the business, opened a second location, and created an employee profit sharing program that Blake would have considered impossibly generous. The staff who used to work for Blake now work for me, and they've seen the difference between a boss who treats employees as disposable resources and one who treats them as valuable partners. My father, who is now 75, serves as my chief security consultant. The surveillance system he installed to catch employee thieves ended up catching my own husband, and he takes considerable satisfaction in that irony. I've also become something Blake never expected: an advocate for financial literacy and abuse awareness. I speak at conferences about recognizing the warning signs of financial manipulation, and I've established a foundation that provides legal assistance to women who are facing financial abuse from spouses or partners. The foundation is called the Sterling House Foundation, named after my father's maiden name, and dedicated to ensuring that no woman has to face financial devastation alone. Last month, I received a letter from a woman in Oregon, whose husband had attempted a scheme almost identical to Blake's. She had recognized the warning signs from an interview I had given to a financial magazine, and she had contacted an attorney before her husband could complete his plan. Her marriage was ending, but she was protecting her assets and her future. Her husband was facing criminal charges for attempted fraud. Most importantly, she was taking control of her situation instead of becoming a victim. "Thank you for speaking out," she wrote. "Thank you for showing me that the house can win, even when you don't think you own the house." That letter reminded me why Blake's betrayal, as painful as it was, had also been a gift. It forced me to discover strength I didn't know I possessed. It showed me that I could survive the complete destruction of everything I thought I knew about my life and emerge stronger. It taught me that sometimes the people we trust most are the ones who betray us, but that betrayal doesn't have to define us. And it proved to me that while the house always wins, the house belongs to whoever is smart enough, strong enough, and determined enough to claim it. Blake thought he was building a house of cards that would collapse on me while he escaped unharmed. Instead, he built a house of evidence that collapsed on him while I watched from safety. They say the house always wins. They're right. I just made sure I was the house.